The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Eureka, Nevada. But Samuel Wright barely flinched as he guided his horse past the saloon where two miners were settling their dispute, the only way they knew how. It was August of 1878, and the silver boom had transformed this once quiet settlement into a cauldron of ambition, violence, and desperation. Samuel had seen enough bloodshed during his years as a ranch hand and occasional lawman that the sound of bullets no longer stirred his heart the way it once had. In fact, nothing much stirred his heart anymore, which was exactly how he preferred it after losing his parents to cholera 3 years prior. He kept to himself on the small ranch he had inherited just outside of town, tending his cattle and the modest garden his mother had planted before she died, finding a strange comfort in the solitude that wrapped around him like a worn blanket. The garden was his refuge, though he would never admit it to anyone. Vegetables grew in neat rows alongside wildflowers his mother had loved, and he watered them each morning before the Nevada sun became too punishing. It was practical work that kept him fed and gave him something to do with his hands when the silence of the empty house became too heavy. Samuel was 26 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and hands calloused from years of hard work. His dark hair was usually hidden beneath a worn hat, and his gray eyes held a wariness that made most people keep their distance. He preferred it that way, because keeping people at arm's length meant never having to feel the crushing weight of loss again. That morning in late August started like any other. Samuel rose before dawn, pulled on his boots and his father's old vest, and walked out to check on the horses before heading to the garden with his watering can. The air was still cool, a brief respite before the heat would settle in, and he could hear the distant lowing of cattle in the pasture. Everything was exactly as it should be, ordered and predictable and safe. But as he approached the garden, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Someone was humming. The sound was soft and melodic, a tune he did not recognize, but that seemed to wrap around him like warm honey. Samuel's hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip as he moved quietly toward the source of the sound. Trespassers were rare this far from town, but in Eureka, you could never be too careful. He rounded the corner of the small shed that held his tools and froze at the sight before him. A young woman knelt among his mother's wildflowers, her fingers gently touching the petals as she hummed. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, torn at the hem and dusty from travel. Her dark blonde hair hung in a long braid down her back, and even from behind, Samuel could see she was thin, too thin, as though she had not eaten properly in some time. But what struck him most was the sound of her voice, that haunting melody that seemed to fill the empty spaces inside him that he had carefully walled off. "Who are you?" His voice came out harsher than he intended, and the woman gasped and spun around, her eyes wide with fear. Samuel found himself looking into the most unusual hazel eyes he had ever seen, flecked with gold and green that caught the early morning light. She could not have been more than 21 or 22, with delicate features and a face that would have been beautiful if not for the gauntness of hunger and the purple bruise that colored her left cheekbone. "I am sorry," she said quickly, her voice trembling as she scrambled to her feet. "I did not mean to trespass. I was just so tired, and your garden was so beautiful, and I thought I could rest here for just a moment before moving on. Please, I will leave right away." She swayed slightly as she stood, and Samuel noticed she was barefoot, her feet cut and bleeding. His hand moved away from his pistol, though his guard remained up. "Where did you come from?" "Virginia City," she said, and the name of the town some distance away explained the state of her feet. "I have been walking for 3 days. Walking. Where's your horse?" I do not have one. I had to leave quickly, and I could not take anything with me. Her eyes darted past him as though checking to see if someone had followed her, and Samuel felt a prickle of unease. "What is your name, Grace?" she said after a moment's hesitation. "Grace Dalton." "Well, Grace Dalton, you look like you are about to fall over. When did you last eat?" She bit her lip, and he could see her pride warring with her desperation. "The day before yesterday. A woman in a town I passed through gave me some bread." Samuel sighed and gestured toward the house. "Come on. I will get you some food." "I could not impose," she protested, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that made her flush with embarrassment. "You already imposed by trespassing in my garden," Samuel said, though his tone had softened slightly. "Might as well impose a little more. Come on before you faint." He did not wait to see if she would follow, just turned and walked toward the house. After a moment, he heard her limping footsteps behind him. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with a kitchen table, a stove, and basic furnishings that spoke of function over comfort. Samuel gestured for her to sit while he stoked the fire in the stove and set about making breakfast. Grace sat gingerly in one of the chairs, her hands folded in her lap as she watched him work. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "I know I am a stranger, and you have no reason to help me. My mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I let a woman starve on my property," Samuel said as he cracked eggs into a pan. "Besides, you look like you could use a decent meal and a place to rest those feet. You are very kind." "I am practical," he corrected, though he was not entirely sure that was true. Something about the way she had been humming in the garden, touching his mother's flowers with such reverence, had stirred something in him that he thought had died along with his parents. He made scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, and set a plate in front of her along with a cup of coffee. Grace stared at the food as though it were a miracle, and then she looked up at him with tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eat," Samuel said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. She ate slowly at first, as though trying to maintain some dignity, but hunger soon overcame her manners, and she devoured the food with an urgency that made Samuel's chest tighten. When had he last cared about another person's well-being? When had he last felt anything beyond the numb routine of his days? While she ate, he fetched a basin of warm water and some clean cloths. "Let me see your feet," he said when she had finished. Grace hesitated, clearly embarrassed, but Samuel just gave her a level look until she reluctantly extended one foot. The soles were cut and blistered, caked with dried blood and dirt. He cleaned them carefully, and though she winced, she did not cry out. There was a strength in her that belied her fragile appearance. "What were you running from?" Samuel asked as he wrapped her feet in clean bandages. Grace was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "My stepfather. He wanted to marry me off to a man twice my age, a friend of his who owned a share in one of the mines. I refused, and he hit me. When he said he would drag me to the altar whether I agreed or not, I waited until he passed out drunk and I ran." The quiet way she spoke of such violence made Samuel's jaw tighten. "Your mother, she died when I was 16. It has been just me and him for 4 years, and each year he became meaner, especially when he drank. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, but when he made that arrangement without my consent, I knew I had to leave or lose myself entirely." Samuel finished wrapping her other foot and sat back. "You cannot walk anywhere on these feet for at least a few days, and you need rest and proper food. You can stay here until you heal." "I could not possibly," Grace started, but Samuel cut her off. "Where else are you going to go? Into Eureka? Do you have money for a hotel, family somewhere?" She shook her head, looking down at her bandaged feet. "I have no money and no family. I plan to find work somewhere, maybe as a housekeeper or a seamstress. I can sew very well. Then stay here and recover first. There is a spare room upstairs. It is not much, but it has a bed and a door that locks if that makes you feel safer." Grace looked at him with those unusual hazel eyes, and Samuel felt something shift inside him, like a door he had locked tight was being gently pushed open. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." "Because someone should," Samuel said simply. "And because you were humming in my mother's garden, and that is the first time anything has felt alive there since she died." Her expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Then I accept your kindness, and I will repay it however I can." Over the following days, Grace remained in the house, resting and recovering her strength. Samuel brought her meals and changed the bandages on her feet, and slowly the cuts began to heal. She did not speak much at first, seeming content to sit by the window and watch the world outside, but Samuel noticed she hummed often, soft melodies that drifted through the house and made the empty rooms feel less lonely. On the third day, he came inside to find her in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner despite her injured feet. "What are you doing?" he asked, more surprised than angry. "You have been so kind to me," Grace said, turning from the stove with a slight smile. "The least I can do is make you a proper meal. I may not have much, but I am a decent cook." The smell coming from the pot was indeed promising, something savory with herbs he recognized from the garden. "You should be resting." "I have been resting for 3 days. I am going mad sitting still." "Please, let me do this." Samuel nodded reluctantly and sat down at the table. As he watched her move around the kitchen with practiced ease, he found himself actually looking forward to dinner, not for the food but for the company. When had the silence of this house become oppressive rather than comforting? They ate together, and the stew Grace had made was the best thing Samuel had tasted in years. "My mother taught me," she explained when he complimented her cooking. "She said a woman should know how to make a home warm and welcoming, that food made with care was a way of showing love. She sounds like she was a good woman." "She was," Grace said softly. "I miss her every day. After she died, my stepfather changed. Or maybe he was always cruel and she just kept it hidden from me. I will never know." "My parents were good people too," Samuel found himself saying, surprising himself with the admission. "Losing them felt like losing my anchor. I have been drifting ever since." Grace looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "I think we all drift sometimes. Maybe we just need to find something worth anchoring to again." Her words stayed with him long after they finished dinner, and she retired upstairs to rest. Samuel sat on the porch, smoking his pipe and staring out at the darkening sky. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something besides numbness. It was uncomfortable and frightening, and yet also strangely exhilarating, like waking up from a long sleep. By the end of the first week, Grace's feet had healed enough for her to walk without pain, and Samuel knew he should bring up the subject of what came next. But he found himself reluctant to do so, enjoying her presence more than he wanted to admit. She had taken over the cooking and started tidying the house, bringing a warmth and life to it that had been absent since his mother's death. More than that, she hummed while she worked, filling the air with melodies that seemed to seep into his bones and thaw something frozen inside him. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Grace said, "I should start looking for work in town. You have been generous beyond measure, but I cannot stay here indefinitely." "Why not?" The words were out before Samuel could stop them, and Grace turned to look at him with surprise. "Because it is your home and I am an intruder." "You are not an intruder. You are," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "you are welcome here, for as long as you want to stay." "Samuel," she said softly, and the sound of his name on her lips made his heart beat faster. "People will talk." A single man and woman living under the same roof. It is not proper. Let them talk. I stopped caring what people in this town thought a long time ago. Grace smiled, but there was sadness in it. You may not care, but it could ruin whatever reputation I hope to build. If I am to make a life here, I need to be respectable. She was right, of course, and Samuel knew it. But the thought of her leaving, of the house returning to its previous silence, made something in his chest constrict painfully. What if you did not have to be alone? Grace's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? Samuel took a breath, his heart pounding. This was madness, and yet it felt more right than anything had in years. Marry me. What? Grace stood up, staring at him in shock. Samuel, we barely know each other. I know you are kind and strong, and that you make my house feel like a home again. I know that, when I hear you humming in the garden, I feel something I thought I had lost forever. I know that the thought of you leaving makes me realize how much I want you to stay. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. You cannot mean this. You are just being kind, offering me security because you feel sorry for me. I am offering you security, yes, Samuel admitted, standing to face her, but not because I feel sorry for you. Because in this past week, you have reminded me what it feels like to be alive. My mother used to say that a house is just wood and nails until someone fills it with love and music, and you have done both. I do not expect you to love me, Grace. But I can offer you safety and a home, and maybe in time we can build something real. Grace was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, You barely know me, Samuel. What if I am not who you think I am? Then we will figure it out together. I am not asking for perfection, Grace. I am just asking you to stay. She wiped at her eyes, and when she looked at him, there was something raw and vulnerable in her gaze. I do not want to be a burden, and I will not marry you just for security. If we do this, I want to try to make it a real marriage, not just an arrangement of convenience. I would like that, Samuel said, and he realized with startling clarity that he meant it. Then yes, Grace whispered. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Eureka. It was a simple ceremony with no guests, just the two of them and the preacher in the small church at the edge of town. Grace wore a dress that Samuel had bought for her from the general store, simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Samuel wore his father's best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. When the preacher asked him if he took Grace to be his wife, Samuel looked into her hazel eyes and said, I do, with a conviction that surprised him. And when Grace said the same, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing, something settled in Samuel's chest, a sense of rightness that he had not felt in years. They walked back to the ranch as husband and wife, and the afternoon sun painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and orange. Grace slipped her hand into Samuel's as they walked, and the simple gesture made his throat tight with emotion. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. Terrified, Grace admitted with a small laugh, but also hopeful. Is that strange? No, Samuel said. I feel the same way. That night they sat up talking long after the sun had set. Samuel told her about his parents, about how his father had taught him to ride and rope cattle, how his mother had insisted on keeping the garden even when water was scarce. Grace told him about her childhood before her mother died, about the songs her mother used to sing, and the dreams she had once had of a different life. I always wanted to have a family of my own, Grace said softly. A real family, full of love and laughter. My stepfather crushed those dreams, made me think I was worthless. But sitting here with you, I feel like maybe those dreams are not so impossible after all. They are not impossible, Samuel said, reaching over to take her hand. We can build that family together, Grace. It may not be conventional, but it can be real." She squeezed his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert. For the first time since his parents died, Samuel felt like he had something to look forward to, something worth protecting. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment as they learned to live as husband and wife. Samuel continued working the ranch while Grace took over running the household. She cooked, cleaned, tended the garden, and slowly began adding her own touches to the house. She brought in wildflowers to brighten the rooms, hung curtains she sewed herself, and filled the air with her constant humming. Samuel found himself looking forward to coming inside at the end of each day, knowing Grace would be there with a warm meal and a smile. They talked over dinner, sharing stories of their days, and slowly the awkwardness between them began to fade. Samuel learned that Grace had a quick wit and a love of stories, that she was stronger than she looked and not afraid of hard work. Grace learned that beneath Samuel's gruff exterior was a deeply caring man who had built walls around his heart to protect himself from more pain. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Samuel came inside to find Grace sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. He immediately crossed to her side, his heart clenching with concern. "What is wrong? Did someone hurt you? Did your stepfather find you?" "No, nothing like that," Grace said, wiping at her eyes with a trembling hand. She held up a letter. "This came today from the territorial government office. My stepfather is dead. He got into a fight in a saloon in Virginia City 2 weeks ago and was shot. He is gone, Samuel. I am truly free." Relief washed over Samuel, followed quickly by concern as Grace's tears continued to fall. He knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms. "Then why are you crying?" "Because I should feel sad, and I do not," Grace said against his shoulder. "I should mourn him, but all I feel is relief and guilt for feeling relieved. What kind of person does that make me?" "A human one," Samuel said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "He was cruel to you, Grace. You do not owe him your tears. Your mother would understand." "I hope so," she whispered. Then she looked at Samuel with something fierce in her eyes. "I want this marriage to be real, Samuel, not just on paper but in every way. I do not want to be tied to my past anymore. I want to build a future with you." Samuel's heart began to pound. Over the past month, his feelings for Grace had grown from fascination to something deeper, something that made his chest ache when he looked at her. He had been trying to be patient, to give her time and space, but hearing her say she wanted the same thing he did made relief and desire flood through him in equal measure. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face. "I am sure," Grace said, and she leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, both of them uncertain, but then Samuel's arms came around her, and he kissed her back with all the longing he had been holding in. Grace made a small sound against his lips and pressed closer, and Samuel felt like he was burning from the inside out. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the day I found you in the garden," he admitted. "I have been wanting you to," Grace said with a soft laugh. "I was beginning to think you saw me as a charity case and nothing more." "Never," Samuel said fiercely. "You are my wife, Grace, and I am falling in love with you." Her eyes widened and then she smiled, a brilliant expression that made her face radiant. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since you cleaned my feet and did not make me feel ashamed." That night, their marriage became real in every sense, and Samuel understood for the first time what his mother had meant about a house becoming a home. Grace was the music he had not known he was missing, the melody that made everything else make sense. As summer turned to fall, their love deepened and grew. Samuel found himself smiling more, laughing at Grace's stories and jokes, looking for excuses to touch her as they passed each other in the house. Grace bloomed under his care and affection, the gauntness leaving her face and the fear fading from her eyes. She sang now instead of just humming, her voice filling the ranch with joy. They worked side by side in the garden, and Grace taught Samuel the names of all the plants his mother had grown. They rode out to check on the cattle together, Grace sitting behind Samuel on his horse with her arms wrapped around his waist. They spent evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in impossible colors while they planned for the future. "I want children," Grace said one evening as they sat together, her head resting on Samuel's shoulder. "At least 3 or 4. I want this house to be full of laughter and noise and life." "I want that too," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "Though I have to admit, the thought of keeping up with 3 or 4 little ones is terrifying." Grace laughed. "We will manage. We make a good team." They did make a good team, Samuel thought, better than he ever could have imagined that morning when he found her humming in his garden. She had brought color and warmth back into his life, had reminded him that love was worth the risk of loss. In November, Grace told him she was pregnant. Samuel swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy. That night, he placed his hand on her still flat stomach and marveled at the miracle of it, that from their love would come new life. The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and Samuel hovered over her anxiously, bringing her crackers and ginger tea and rubbing her back when she was sick. As her belly grew, she had trouble sleeping, and Samuel would stay awake with her, telling her stories or reading to her from the books his mother had treasured. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Grace told him one night as they lay in bed, Samuel's hand resting on her swollen stomach. "I hope so," Samuel said. "I am terrified of doing something wrong." "We will figure it out together," Grace said, echoing his words from the night he had proposed, "just like we have figured out everything else." Their son was born on a warm day in early June of 1879, after a long and difficult labor that left Samuel pacing the floor and feeling utterly helpless. The midwife from town finally emerged from the bedroom and told him he had a healthy baby boy, and that Grace was tired but well. Samuel rushed into the room and found Grace cradled in their son, her face exhausted but radiant with joy. "Meet Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas Wright. I thought we could name him after your father." Samuel's eyes filled with tears as he looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant in her arms. "Thomas," he repeated. "It is perfect." He climbed carefully onto the bed beside Grace and wrapped his arms around both of them, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This, he thought. This was what life was supposed to be. Fatherhood transformed Samuel in ways he had not expected. He found himself utterly besotted with the tiny human who depended on them for everything. He would get up in the middle of the night to walk Thomas around the house when the baby was fussy, singing the songs Grace had taught him in a low voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth as silk so there was no chance of splinters. He watched in awe as Grace nursed their son, marveling at the fierce love in her eyes. Grace was a natural mother, patient and loving even when exhausted. She sang to Thomas constantly, the same melodies she had hummed in the garden that first morning, and Samuel would pause in whatever he was doing just to listen. The house rang with laughter and baby cries and all the beautiful chaos of a growing family. When Thomas was 6 months old, Samuel expanded the ranch, buying more cattle and hiring a young man from town to help with the work. Business was good, and he wanted to make sure Grace and Thomas would always be provided for. Grace started a small vegetable garden to sell produce in town, and she became known for her preserves and pickles. Together, They were building not just a home but a legacy. On their second wedding anniversary, Samuel took Grace into Eureka for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving Thomas with the wife of their ranch hand. It was the first time they had been alone together since the baby was born, and Samuel was reminded all over again of how lucky he was. Grace wore a new dress, green to match her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a way that showed off her slender neck. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked her over dessert. "About saying yes to a stranger who asked you to marry him after a week?" Grace smiled and reached across the table to take his hand. "Not a single one. You saved my life, Samuel, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I love you more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Samuel said. "You were the music I did not know I was missing. That morning I found you in the garden. I thought my life was fine the way it was. I had no idea how empty I had been until you filled all those hollow spaces." They walked home under a sky full of stars, hand in hand, talking about their dreams for the future. Grace wanted to expand the garden, maybe even start selling her flowers in town. Samuel wanted to build a bigger house, something with enough room for the large family they both hoped to have. They talked about teaching Thomas to ride, about the values they wanted to instill in him, about growing old together on this land they both loved. Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, learning to walk and then to run, getting into everything and keeping both his parents constantly on their toes. He had Samuel's gray eyes and Grace's hazel flecked with gold, and his laughter was the sweetest sound either of them had ever heard. When Thomas was 2, Grace became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and Grace joked that her body knew what it was doing now. Samuel was still anxious, but he trusted that everything would be all right. In the spring of 1881, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, after Grace's mother. Rose was different from Thomas from the start, quieter and more observant, with a head full of dark blonde hair like her mother. Samuel held her tiny form and felt his heart expand even more, amazed that he could love another child as much as he loved Thomas. "Our family is growing," Grace said from the bed, watching Samuel with their daughter. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Samuel said truthfully. "You have given me everything, Grace." As the years passed, the ranch prospered and their family continued to grow. Another son, James, was born in 1883, followed by twin daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, in 1885. The house that had once been so silent was now constantly full of noise and activity. Children running through the rooms and playing in the garden where Samuel had first found Grace. Samuel built the bigger house he had dreamed of, with plenty of bedrooms and a large kitchen where Grace could cook and bake with the children. The garden expanded too, becoming the pride of the county, with vegetables and flowers that Grace and the children tended together. And always, there was music. Grace sang while she worked, and she taught the children her songs, so the house was filled with melody from morning until night. Samuel would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch his family, overcome with gratitude for the life they had built. Thomas, now 10 years old, was already learning to work the ranch alongside his father. Rose, at 8, had her mother's gift for growing things and spent hours in the garden. James, at 6, was the wildest of the bunch, always getting into trouble and making everyone laugh. The twins, at 4, were inseparable and full of mischief. On a warm evening in late summer of 1888, the family gathered on the expanded porch after dinner. The children were playing in the yard while Samuel and Grace sat together in the rocking chairs Samuel had built, watching the sunset. Grace was humming again, the same tune Samuel had heard that first morning 10 years ago, and he reached over to take her hand. "You remember the day we met?" he asked, Grace smiled, that same radiant expression that still made his heart skip. How could I forget? I was so scared and so lost. And then you came around that shed looking like you might shoot me, and instead you fed me and gave me a home. You were humming in my mother's garden. I heard you before I saw you, and something about that sound reached right into my chest and squeezed. I knew before I even saw your face that my life was about to change. Mine too, Grace said softly. I thought I was running away from something, but I was really running toward you, toward this life we have built together. I love you, Samuel said, more now than even on the day we married. Every year with you has been better than the last. I love you too, Grace said. You are my home, Samuel Wright. You and these children and this land. This is everything I ever dreamed of when I was a girl before life got hard. You gave me back my dreams. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to their children laugh and play, the sound mixing with the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the desert sage. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Thomas called out that he had caught a frog, and Rose shrieked with delighted disgust. James was trying to climb a tree he had been forbidden to climb, and the twins were making mud pies in a patch of dirt near the garden. Grace started to get up to intervene, but Samuel pulled her back down gently. Let them be, he said. They are happy and safe. That is all that matters. Grace settled back into her chair and leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. You are right. They are perfect just as they are. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Grace called the children inside for baths and bed. There was the usual chaos of getting 5 children cleaned and into their nightclothes, stories read and songs sung, kisses and hugs distributed. By the time the last child was tucked in and the house was quiet, Samuel and Grace were exhausted but content. They stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the moonlit landscape. Samuel wrapped his arms around Grace from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For staying. For taking a chance on a grumpy cowboy who was too scared to live. For filling my life with music and love and all these beautiful children. For making every day an adventure. Grace turned in his arms to face him, her hazel eyes shining in the moonlight. Thank you for seeing past a desperate woman trespassing in your garden. For offering me not just safety but partnership and love. For being the man I did not dare to hope existed. For giving me a family and a home and a reason to sing. Samuel kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring 10 years of love and commitment into it. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Should we have more children? Grace asked teasingly. 5 seems like a good number, but 6 would be even better. Samuel laughed and pulled her close again. As many as you want, so long as you keep humming in our garden. Always, Grace promised. I will always make music for you. They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms, the way they had every night since that first real night as husband and wife. Outside, the wind rustled through the garden where their story had begun, carrying the scent of flowers and the promise of tomorrow. The years continued to unfold like the pages of a book, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children grow and thrive, each one developing their own personality and dreams. Thomas grew into a fine young man who took naturally to ranching, working alongside Samuel and learning everything his father could teach him about the land and the animals. Rose discovered a passion for teaching and eventually became a schoolteacher in Eureka, bringing the same patience and nurturing spirit she had learned from her mother. James, true to his wild nature, became a horse trainer known throughout the territory for his skill and daring. The twins, Mary and Elizabeth, remained inseparable and eventually opened a dress shop together in town. Their designs sought after by women from miles around. Samuel and Grace were blessed with 2 more children, another son named Daniel, born in 1889, and a daughter, Clara, born in 1891. With 7 children total, the house was never quiet, and Grace joked that she had achieved her dream of a chaotic, love-filled home beyond her wildest expectations. As Samuel approached 50, he began to slow down slightly, though he would never admit it. Grace, at 45, still worked in her garden every day, though her hands were more gnarled now, and her hair was streaked with silver. But she was still beautiful to Samuel, even more so because her face showed the map of their life together. Every laugh line and careworn crease a testament to years well lived. One evening in the fall of 1898, when most of their older children had homes of their own and only the 2 youngest still lived with them, Samuel and Grace took a walk through the garden together. It was much larger now than it had been 20 years ago, a sprawling testament to Grace's love and care. Flowers bloomed in every color imaginable, and vegetables grew in neat rows. "You remember what you said to me the day you proposed?" Grace asked as they walked hand in hand through the paths between the flowers. "I said a lot of things that day," Samuel said with a smile, "most of them foolish." "You said I was the music you had been missing," Grace reminded him. "That when you heard me humming in this garden, you felt alive again." "I meant every word. I still do." Grace stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "You were the melody I needed too, Samuel. I did not realize it at the time because I was so lost and scared, but you gave my life harmony. You gave me a reason to sing." "We have had a good life together, have we not?" Samuel asked, though he knew the answer. "The best life," Grace said firmly. "Better than anything I could have imagined that day I stumbled into your garden, hungry and hurt and running from everything. You did not just save me, Samuel. You showed me what love really looks like. You taught me that home is not a place but a person, and you are my home." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close the way he had done countless times over the past 20 years. "And you are mine. Every single day with you has been a gift, Grace. Even the hard ones, even the days when the children were sick, or the cattle died, or money was tight. Because we faced it all together." They stood there in the garden as the sun set, surrounded by the flowers and vegetables they had planted together, the physical manifestation of the life they had cultivated. Grace began to hum that same melody Samuel had heard 20 years ago, and he closed his eyes and let it wash over him, still as powerful and moving as it had been the first time. "Dance with me," Samuel said suddenly, and Grace laughed. "Here, now, we are too old for such foolishness." "We are never too old for dancing," Samuel said, and he began to sway with her in his arms, moving to the rhythm of her humming. They danced there in the garden as the stars began to appear overhead. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate losses. They danced until Grace was breathless and laughing, until Samuel's bad knee was complaining and they both needed to sit down. They walked back to the house arm in arm, their steps perfectly matched after so many years together. As they settled onto the porch to rest, Daniel and Clara came out to join them. At 9 and 7, respectively, they still saw their parents as invincible, still believed that their family would go on forever exactly as it was. Samuel looked at them and saw echoes of all his children, the legacy he and Grace had created together. "Tell us about how you met," Clara said, climbing into Grace's lap despite being slightly too big for such things. "Tell us about the garden." Grace looked at Samuel with a smile, and he nodded. They had told this story dozens of times, but it never got old. Grace began to speak, her voice soft and melodic, painting a picture of a desperate woman who stumbled into a lonely man's garden and found salvation, of a gruff cowboy who heard music and let it back into his heart. "And did you love each other right away?" Clara asked when the story was finished. "Not right away," Grace said honestly. "But I think we were meant to love each other from the moment we met. We just needed time to realize it." "Your mother was the bravest person I had ever met," Samuel added. "She walked for 3 days to escape a bad situation, with nothing but the clothes on her back. And when I found her, instead of begging or acting helpless, she was making music among the flowers. That is when I knew she was special." "And your father was the kindest," Grace said, looking at Samuel with all the love of 20 years shining in her eyes. "He could have turned me away, could have been suspicious or cruel. Instead, he fed me and cared for me and offered me a home. He saw me when I was at my lowest and treated me with dignity and respect. That is when I started to fall in love with him." The children listened with rapt attention, and Samuel felt his heart swell with pride and love. This was his legacy, not just the successful ranch or the thriving garden, but this family built on love and mutual respect. These children who knew their parents' story and understood that love was a choice you made every day. As autumn turned to winter and then to spring again, life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas married a woman named Sarah and gave Samuel and Grace their first grandchild, a boy named Samuel after his grandfather. Rose was courting the new doctor in town, a serious young man named Robert who treated her with respect and admiration. James traveled with his horses but wrote home regularly, his letters full of adventures and promises to settle down someday. The twins' dress shop was thriving, and they had hired 2 assistants to keep up with demand. Samuel watched his children build their own lives with satisfaction, knowing he and Grace had given them a strong foundation. They had not just survived their difficult beginnings, but had thrived, creating something beautiful and lasting. One morning in early summer of 1900, Samuel woke to find Grace already up and outside. He found her in the garden, kneeling among the flowers she had planted 2 decades ago, humming that familiar melody. She looked up when she heard him approach, and her smile was as radiant as it had been the day they married. "I was just thinking about that first morning," she said. "22 years ago when you found me here. Can you believe it has been so long? Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once," Samuel said, settling down beside her on the ground despite his protesting knees. "You were so thin and scared, and I did not know what to do with you." "And now you are stuck with me," Grace teased. "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said seriously. "Asking you to marry me that week, it should have been crazy, but somehow I knew, Grace. I knew you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have built something beautiful, have we not? This life, this family, this love. We took broken pieces and made something whole." "We did," Samuel agreed, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat together in the garden for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. The flowers Grace had planted, the vegetables that would feed their family, the house behind them filled with memories and love. The sound of their youngest children playing somewhere in the distance, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Promise me something," Grace said softly. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how many years we have left, you will remember that you are my greatest adventure, that loving you has been the honor of my life." Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. "I promise, and you promise me the same. Promise me you know how much you have meant to me, how you transformed my entire existence just by being brave enough to rest in my garden and make music." "I promise," Grace whispered. They kissed there in the garden where their story began, surrounded by flowers and sunshine and the life they had built together. 22 years of love and laughter, of challenges overcome and joys shared, of music that filled every empty space and transformed a house into a home. The years that followed were good ones. Samuel and Grace grew older gracefully, watching their grandchildren multiply and their children build successful lives. They remained active on the ranch as long as they were able, and even when their bodies began to fail them, their love never did. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodnight, still found reasons to dance in the garden when the mood struck them. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, all 7 of their children came home with their families, filling the house with 3 generations of Wrights. There was a huge celebration with food and music and laughter, and Samuel stood on the porch watching his family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Grace came to stand beside him, her hand slipping into his with the ease of 3 decades of practice. "Look what we made," she said softly. "Look what you made," Samuel corrected. "You brought life and music to a lonely house and a closed-off man. Everything good in my life flows from the day you stumbled into my garden." "We made it together," Grace insisted. "Your kindness, your willingness to take a chance on a stranger, that is what made all of this possible. You could have turned me away, but you chose to see me, to really see me. That choice changed everything." As the sun set on that anniversary evening, Samuel stood to address his family. They all quieted, children and grandchildren alike turning their attention to the patriarch. 30 years ago, I married the woman who saved my life," he began. "I know that sounds backwards. She was the one who needed saving after all, but the truth is, we saved each other. I was existing but not living, going through the motions but feeling nothing. And then one August morning, I heard humming in my garden, and suddenly I felt everything. Grace, you are the music that gave my life meaning. You are the melody that makes every day beautiful. And I want all of our children and grandchildren to see what real love looks like. It is not perfect or easy. It is choosing each other every single day, even when it is hard. It is building something together, brick by brick, year by year. It is making music together even when the world is silent." Grace's eyes were filled with tears, and around them, their family was equally moved. Their eldest son Thomas stood and raised his glass. "To our parents who showed us what love really means, may we all be fortunate enough to find what you have found together." The family echoed the toast, and Grace pulled Samuel into a tight embrace. 30 years, she whispered against his chest, "and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day." 40 more, Samuel said. "At least." Grace laughed through her tears. "If the good Lord is willing and we take care of each other." "Always," Samuel promised. "I will always take care of you. You are my heart, Grace, the music I was missing, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." As their family celebrated around them, Samuel and Grace stood wrapped in each other's arms. 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love story that would echo through generations. The garden where they met still bloomed every year, tended now by children and grandchildren who knew the story of how their grandmother had stumbled into their grandfather's life and changed everything. The music that had brought them together never stopped. Grace hummed and sang every day, teaching her songs to anyone who would learn them. And Samuel listened, his heart full, knowing that finding her humming in his garden that August morning in 1878 was the moment his real life had begun. They lived many more years together, growing old surrounded by love and family, never taking a single day for granted. And when the time came for them to leave this world, they went knowing they had lived fully and loved completely. that their music would continue in the hearts of everyone they left behind. Their story became legend in Eureka, the tale of the cowboy who found a woman humming in his garden and realized she was the music he had been missing, the song his soul had been waiting to hear. It was a story about taking chances and opening closed hearts, about the transformative power of love and kindness, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. And in the garden that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, flowers continued to bloom year after year, and if you listened carefully on quiet mornings, some swore you could still hear humming on the breeze, a melody that spoke of love found, lives transformed, and music that would never fade.